Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, also in the United States, because we have Valerie Keogh with us coming from England for afternoon tea and a talk about her book. But before I get to Valerie, because I'm excited to talk to her, I just want to say a couple things. One is thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. And I would also like to thank Valerie for letting us partner with other libraries to share this talk with their community. So I'd like to welcome the patrons of Ashland, of course, but also Woburn, Wellesley, Needham, Norwell, Leverett, Spencer, Westboro, Lexington, Rockport, and Canton. I think that when libraries get together to do stuff, we make magic. And apparently, according to Valerie, they also might consider doing some murder. So we'll dig into that too. Valerie's new book, The Librarian, oh my gosh, how awesome is that? Just came out on April 21st, and you can order signed copies by Bookplate from Aesop's Fable, which is in Holliston, the next town over from us. And I will put a link in the chat for that. Valerie, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. You had some really interesting things in your bio, but the one thing that I was really interested in is that you went from nursing to writing. And so I would love to know more about your journey into being a writer, as well as, and let's talk about the book second. Let's talk about you first. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much for having me, Mina. It's a great pleasure to be here. And hello to everybody. It's wonderful. It's 7 o'clock here in the UK, by the way. So it's nice to have afternoon tea. And I'm going to bend this down for a second so you can see I'm all set up for my afternoon tea. So I'm going to pour myself a cup so that I can actually, and it is tea. I was tempted to fill the pot with wine, but I thought that wouldn't go down too well. So, because it's 7 o'clock.
Well, we don't know, it won't hurt us.
Yeah. I always wanted to write. I grew up in a large family. There was 9 of us. So writing was my escape from living in a very small house with a very big family. I used to take my books and hide behind the sofa. So I always wanted to write a book that went on forever because I hated books ending. Mm-hmm. I used to go to our local library, then it was about 3 miles from our house. And when I joined it first, and I was about 7 or 8, you could only take 3 books out. And then they increased that to 6 books out, but they were all hardback. So I used to struggle home with this big pile of books. And I'd go through them in a week or so, because I just lived in my books. I was a regular bookworm. That was me. So I always dreamed then of actually writing my own books. But sometimes dreams can become so important that you're so afraid of failing that you don't actually get started. So I was almost 50 before I thought to myself, if I don't write it now, I can stop dreaming about it. So I sat down one day and I said, I started a book and I didn't stop writing until I'd finished it. Now, the problem is I was very naive. This is 15 years ago. I thought that was it. You write a book and the whole world will stop and go, yeah, you've written a book. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I tried to get an agent for a long time. And then my sister actually rang me and said, she knew that I was trying to get a publisher. She rang me and told me she'd read an article about somebody who'd self-published on Amazon. Mm-hmm. So I thought, why not? So I did, and I kept writing and kept self-publishing. And every now and then I'd try and get an agent, and then more e-first publishers started coming online. And about 10 years ago now, I submitted to a couple of publishers who took direct submissions. And eventually in 2018, I got a publishing contract, my first publishing contract with a publisher called Book Tour for two books, The Housewife and Secrets Between Us. And that was my kind of entrance into the world of publishing. And the thing is, with like a lot of businesses, once you get your foot in the door, it's easier to stay in there. So I decided to take the risk and give up my nursing at that stage. I had been nursing all along, near enough. I took the odd few years out to do something different, but I had stayed nursing. I was working in the care of the elderly at that stage, which I did love, but writing is what I really wanted to do. So I decided, take a risk, write full time and see what happens.
Mhm.
And then, of course, what happened was Book Couture didn't renew my contract.
Oh, no.
So I cried for a full day. I bawled crying. I was so devastated. It was very upsetting because you just assume that once you're there, everything is plain sailing. The bottom line is publishing is a business, and it can be a very cruel business. But because I had my foot in that door, my next publishing contract came easier.
Mm-hmm.
So within about 4 weeks of that day when I cried, I think I was lucky because I felt so unfairly treated by that publisher that after a day crying, I got angry. And I decided I'm going to teach them that I can be a writer. So about 4 weeks later, I signed a 6-book contract with Bloodhound Books. So that went really well. And then about 2 years ago, they sold up and things weren't going so well. So I was approached by another, I was approached this time, I was headhunted, which was actually quite exciting, by Boldwood Books, and I'm still with them, and they're just wonderful. When you have a good relationship with a publisher, it's just magic. My editor, Emily, is just an absolute dream to work with. We have a good rapport. She understands the way I write, because, well, every writer writes differently. I'm what they call a pantser. I have a very vague idea of the story, and I just start writing and hope that it all falls together by the end. And sometimes I'm nearly at the end and I'm still not quite sure what's going to happen. So the fact that she accepts it's the way I write is great, because some publishers like to have a detailed synopsis before you start writing. That's very hard if you're a pantser. So this works fine for me. So I've had how many books have I published with them now? I've had 1, 2, 3.
Trying to see your tea caddy, the one
Yes.
on your yeah.
I've set up my cake stand with books on one side and with cakes on the other, which I haven't eaten yet, by the way. So yeah, I have all. I'll bend down a bit more. So you have all my books there, balanced on the cake stand. I thought that was quite fun. They'll probably be there for next month. On this side, I have cakes.
Oh, yum.
Unfortunately, I can't talk and eat at the same time, so I'll have to eat them later. But I can't drink tea.
Hungry, and I'd have to leave the meeting. So, Valerie, okay. So I have to say, I did pull out my
I love your teapot.
Yeah, but it doesn't have tea in it because it's super special. And I wanted to show off my stirrer, my cat stirrer.
I love that. That is so cool.
So we're definitely having tea here. So I think K.L has joined us for with her specialty tea. So you said that when you always wanted to write, but you didn't start till you were 50. So when you were deciding what direction to go in when you were in England, maybe they choose around 16, 17, and we choose around 18. What made you go towards nursing instead of English or journalism or anything like that?
To go to university when I left school cost too much, and we didn't have any money. Why I chose nursing, and this is a very, very weird way of choosing a career, my mother didn't want me to. So I was a typical brat child. There wasn't, I would have liked to have done journalism, but I'm not very brave. And my siblings all went from school to secretarial courses. Nobody went to university because of the expense more than anything. When there was 9 of us, my father died when I was 5, and I have 3 younger siblings. So there wasn't much money to go around, and we were expected to get a job that brought in money. And in my day, nursing was on the spot, on work related. You didn't go to university like they do now. So literally from the very word go, you were earning money. Not an awful lot, granted, but you were earning and contributing to the household expenses. So it was assumed that's what you do. But I loved nursing. I really did enjoy it. I made some great friends that I'm still friendly with, and that's a great thing with nursing. You do tend to make friends forever, and it's a great occupation that you can, because I went to university then much later as a mature student, and I supported myself by working every weekend. So I nursed weekends, and I did English and Italian in university, and I stayed on university to do a master's in American literature, actually. And I loved going to university. It's such fun. I tell you what's really fun about going to university when you're a mature student is all the 19, 20-year-olds who are desperate to get out earning money. And I'm thinking, oh, been there, done that. It's not that great. So it was quite fun. But and I met my husband in university. I met my husband in the mature students. I was single going to university. I was just 40, and I had started about 2 or 3 months, and I met my husband. I'm pointing that way because he's out. I can hear him outside. Yeah, I met my husband there. So, and then we got married about 3 years later. So, and then we came to the UK.
So you worked as a nurse up until about 40 and continued to on weekends, and then you went to school for English and literature, and that's amazing, like to know that you want to take that turn.
It was actually fun. And I think the fact that I was 40, I was single, and I had my own apartment at that stage, and I could see my nieces and nephews were all going to university, and it just sounded fun. I said, I can do that. So I did. And in Ireland at the time, they were giving grants to mature students. So I got a grant, and I worked weekends, and I went to university, and it was great fun. I really did enjoy it. I loved studying English. It was lovely. And I loved studying American literature. So yeah, and I met my husband, which is a bonus point for meeting my husband. But when we moved to the UK, then I stayed nursing. And it was eventually then I started to write. And it was quite funny because the reason I write under a pen name, because Keogh is actually my mother's maiden name. Because when I started writing, I was still nursing, and I have a self-published series still, and it's about a serial killer who's a nurse. So I thought it would be a good idea if I changed my name in case people thought I had the wrong idea about me. So I changed to Keogh. Now, the problem with my mother's maiden name, Keogh, it's a nice name, and Valerie Keogh looks good in a book, except people can't pronounce it. In the UK, I get all kinds of Kyoff and Kieff and all kinds of strange pronunciations. So had I known that people would find it so difficult to pronounce, I might have chosen something a bit simpler. But that's how it is. Yeah.
But you have, so is that the Dublin series, the nursing one?
No, it's a Hudson and Connolly series. It's only self-published, and I don't have any paperbacks of it. The Irish series, the Irish crime series, is a very straightforward crime series. There's no serial killing nurse in it. Because I grew up reading Agatha Christie. So when I started to write first, I wanted to write straightforward crime novels, and I loved writing them. I loved the puzzle of crime novels and trying to fool the reader into who the bad guy is. It's great fun. But the problem with writing crime novels is that there's so many crime novels out there, and a lot of them just don't succeed very well. So now I write psychological thrillers, which they're individual, they're standalone books, but my editors prefer them. They sell better. The market for psychological thrillers is just insatiable. And I write 3 to 4 books a year. So
wow.
Yeah, I write a lot, but I don't have a life. I just write. So that's not fair. I'm usually either writing or editing or thinking of the next one. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking of and I will at the moment, because the book I'm writing at the moment, which is, I don't have a name for it. I just can't come up with a name, but I've got to the stage in it where I'm not 100% sure where it's going to go next. So what will happen to me is I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and I'll start puzzling about that. And usually by the time I'm supposed to get up, I will have worked it out. Insomnia is great for that point of view. It's not great for me, really, but I do get great ideas in the middle of the night when it's quiet and I'm trying to sleep. And your brain is relaxed and it's more receptive to ideas, I think. The same as when I'm not writing or editing, I love walking. And like that, if I'm tied up and not in a storyline, if I take myself down, there's a canal not very far away from us, I can walk along the canal. And by the time I've done 3 or 4 miles, that knot is gone. It just clears. And I think it's the fact that your brain relaxes and allows more ideas to come in, and then I get them down as fast as I can before I forget them. So.
I started really fascinated by this idea that you didn't really write until after you went back to university, and then you just started writing like crazy. Like, what made you learn? What was the best learning experience for you to become a good writer?
Reading a lot. Definitely, if you want to write, you read a lot. And I read a lot of books. I think for me, university didn't make much difference, really. It was the fact that I always wanted to write. It's just a matter of getting around to doing it. Because I know people who go on the creative writing courses, which are brilliant, but they don't have the same yen to write that I do. I mean, writing is a business, don't get me wrong, but I have to write. It's just part of who I am now. It's why I write so much, because sometimes I'm desperate to finish a book, but then when I'm finished, I'm a bit lost because I've had to put all my characters away. That's why people say, oh, did you take a break afterwards? I said, I don't really, I just hop into the next set of characters. I think it stems from my childhood when you're poor and you don't have much, you invent a magical make-believe world of your own. And that's what I did. I made up stories in my head a lot when I was a child. And that's now translated into writing stories that are in my head, which is, it's fun. And I'm on my 24th book, I think. Sometimes I lose count. My next book is my 24th. That's going to be called The Nurse. That's not the one I'm writing. It's the one that's finished. It's actually, I have to do copy edits tomorrow, but it's going to be called The Nurse.
Okay, so yeah, let's get into your books. And I think I didn't mention this, but if people who are listening in want to ask questions, please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will ask Valerie, although I have a bunch. So to start, The Librarian, tell us what it's about.
The Librarian is about a lady called Ava, who works in a library. She loves it. She works as a librarian in the Tate Modern. Now, I did explain earlier, the Tate Modern doesn't actually have a library, but the Tate Britain does. So I borrowed it for a little while just for this book, and then I gave it back. Ava has a quiet life. Her friends think she's too quiet. Her friends think she's a pushover, that she tends to say yes to everything. So one day she's out with her friend Poppy, and she meets this guy in a pub, and the guy asks her to have a drink with him, and she says no. And then she goes to leave. She leaves Poppy behind because Poppy's talking to some guy, and Ava wants to go home. She's not feeling too well. So she heads out, and this guy follows her, and he starts harassing her a bit to come back and have a drink with her. And she says no emphatically. She is thinking about maybe she should go back in just for peace sake, have a drink with him. And then she remembers her friends saying that she says yes too easily, that she should learn to say no. So she says no. But when she walks away from this guy, she hears him shouting after her, "You'll be sorry." And then things start happening to poor Ava. I don't want to give any spoilers. Things start going wrong. Unfortunately, she's doing a part of her job in the library. Part that she's taken on is doing tours of the art gallery, because she loves art, which was her first love. So she shows people around the art gallery, and she damages a painting accidentally, obviously, but she's suspended. And then things just start going wrong for her. And then someone who tries to help her dies. It's very complicated, and she gets something is not right in her world, and everything starts falling apart. So I can't tell you any more because it will spoil the story, but it does all end up kind of well in the end. Psychological thrillers aren't really supposed to end up happy. But when I was a child, I used to read the last page first, and I'd only read a book if it ended happy ever after. I only stopped doing that when I was in my 20s. So my psychological thrillers do tend to end on a kind of positive note. So that was Librarian. I did really enjoy writing it. I had visited the Tate Gallery in London. It's a huge, big building, and all concrete inside, so that you just see the artwork. I haven't unfortunately visited the library in Tate Britain, which is 3 miles down the road. But when I decided to write this book, I wanted the venue to be the Tate Gallery because it's so amazing. But I wanted my character to be a librarian, because I love libraries. Are magic. I love them. The library I visited when I was a child was a very old-fashioned library. It had a sectioned off section for children and a huge big section for adults, but nobody ever spoke. And if you did speak, you got this shh. Well, not like libraries today when everyone chats, which is great. But they were just libraries, and all the books were hardback. There was no paperback, there was no magazines, no newspapers. It was literally just books. But I loved it. I loved my library. I think they're amazing places. So I always wanted to put a librarian in one of my books. So that was the library in that book. So
what made you feel like a librarian would be a good protagonist in a thriller, like a psychological thriller? What characteristics or stereotypical characteristics of a librarian kind of appeal to you for that genre?
I think because they're perceived to live quite quiet lives, hiding away with books and just, spending their lives in quiet libraries, not, old-fashioned libraries, but quiet libraries involved in their books. And quite often psychological thrillers are to do with what's behind what you initially see. So you see the librarian with her books in a quiet venue, surrounded by books, and it's very quiet. But then just peel away some of those layers, and you've got the person with secrets behind what you're seeing. So it's what's behind the facade that fascinates me, and that's perfect for psychological thrillers, is the secrets people have. And Ava has something happened to Ava when she was in university long before, which does come into her life now. But I think we all have secrets. We all have things that we did or didn't do when we were younger. But it's psychological thrillers. It's peeling back at that. And I think the librarians, they're just perfect for that, because they are, I don't know if you're quiet, Mina, but they tend to be. My librarian is quiet and reserved. So it's everything that's behind that.
Well, I'm sure there's people in this audience that have seen other programs of mine, and they can comment on if I'm quiet and reserved. But I'm curious about your own history influencing or impacting the being able to get into the psyche of people, or the potential psyche of people, because these, of course, are fictionalized people. So what in your background has really led you to creating characters and digging deep into their psyche?
Growing up, because we were relatively poor, my mother came from a fairly well-off background, so she tended to put on airs and graces to a certain extent, and we were brought up to kind of do the same thing. So we pretended to be something we weren't really. We were sent to private schools, even though we couldn't really afford it, and I think that has influenced what I write. It's because I myself have a lot of layers, and I am a different person to different people, if that makes sense, because I have friends from my childhood, I have friends from school, I have friends from nursing, and to each of these groups I am a different person. And that fascinates me as well, is that they all see a different part of me, but all those parts make me. And I think everybody has different faces that they show groups of people. We very rarely show the same face to everybody, because I don't know anybody who does, or maybe they do. Maybe I'm the strange one. But I think there is that. I think people have a lot of, a bit like an onion, you know, you peel away all the layers. And sometimes there's a nice little onion in the middle, and sometimes there's rot in the middle. And it's what are you going to get when you start peeling the layers off a person? And that fascinates me in psychological thrillers, that I can do that. It's playing God, really. I make my people, and whether they end up being a solid onion all the way through, or the layers peel off and there's horrible, even nasty core. And it's that the nasty core is fun to write. I'm my self-published series is about a serial killing nurse, and she's really bad because she's a serial killer, but people actually learn to sympathize with her because of her necessity to kill, which sounds weird, but it's how you write these things. And I like to write people that are a little bit not perfect, because you can write about good. I think people who write about good people all the time tend to write rom-coms. I mean, I can't write romantic novels because I just want to kill somebody. So it doesn't work in romance. Not really.
That's funny. Well, sometimes in romance they want to kill each other too.
That's true.
But so that's an amazing perspective of your personal, you know, like your personal, and how people look at each other from their own perspective of what they know of a person. What kind of research do you do when you're writing one book, let's say? What kind of things do you dig into or dive into?
It very much depends on the book. You can spend hours doing research and then have no time to write. So sometimes if I hit a spot in my book when I need to research, I might just put a line of question marks and come back to it, because you're in a flow of the story and you don't want to be pulled out to do research. So I dropped my phone on the floor, it keeps dinging. You have to do some. I like my facts to be correct. That's why I went to the Tate Gallery. Being there, you can get the feel for it much better than if you look on the internet. I mean, sometimes I don't go to streets that I can go on Google Maps and you can walk along, which is brilliant. I research a lot of how to kill people. So, because you want to be, you don't want the reader to be pulled out of the story by saying, that wouldn't happen. So you want things to be factual, but I don't want to bury the reader in facts either. So, because one of there's a part of the story is that they find these mummified bodies in this dining room in this house. There's, I can't remember if there's 6 mummified bodies, but I had to do some research onto how to mummify a body, and it's actually surprisingly easy to mummify a body. It's very hard to mummify a head. So to make my life easier, the bad guy took the heads off. So sometimes you do research and you think, like, I just can't go into all that would entail to mummify a head. So chopping the heads off was a lot easier.
Okay.
I know, but these are things you have to do. And I have climbed under chairs and under tables to see if I'd fit, to make sure that if I use that in the book, it's realistic. So I do get myself into knots when you're doing this, because I tell you, at my age, climbing under a chair or under a table and you bang your head and you think, oh my God, but then you write that in the book, so it's okay. But yeah, you do have to do assignment research. And I have police characters in my books, but my books aren't police procedurals. So I don't spend too much time in getting the police procedure correct. In fact, somebody in the librarian said that wouldn't happen. One of the things that happens in that book, but it happens in my book. So, and I'm allowed to use artistic license to invent things. That's the whole point of writing a book, really, I think. So,
well, which is interesting, because that was one of my questions, is what is the line for you of like actually having something that's real versus something that you created for your story. You know, is there a point where you're just like, you know what, I'm just going to make that up because, like you said, cutting the head off easier.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how deep are you willing to go into research in order to make your book as authentic as possible?
I think I don't write police procedurals, as I said, because I don't want to have to go down to a police station and spend hours getting every little nitty gritty detail correct. In some of my police procedures, I learned from watching TV, which isn't necessarily correct either. But I like the bones of the story to be correct, so that, as I said, so that people aren't, because there's nothing as bad as reading a story and then getting to a section where it just doesn't sound correct. So I want it to sound correct. I want it to feel correct. If I've made it up, I should be good enough to make you believe it. And if I haven't made you believe it, then I haven't done a good job. So I should be able to, I mean, that's part of being a writer is to make up stuff. I mean, J.K. Rowling made up all the Harry Potter books. There's nobody flying around in broomsticks. So but we believed it when I loved the Harry Potter books, and you believe every minute. So it's that getting just that line right to make it believable for the reader.
But do you have readers that contact you and say, oh, you had said that about the librarian. Oh, that couldn't possibly be, you know, that couldn't happen that way.
I had somebody contact me about, I can't remember which book it was in, a medical thing in the book, and she said that wouldn't really happen. But again, you know, I wasn't going to go back, and it would have meant changing too much of the book to have corrected it. And she was a doctor. I think, to be honest, very few people would have known the difference. Mostly I get these things in reviews on Amazon. Like I had somebody in my Irish series, again, harking back to that. I had a reviewer who said, because in the series, the police detective from Ireland goes over to the UK to question a suspect. The reviewer said, that's silly, that wouldn't happen. But in fact, it does happen. And I only know that because my brother was involved in a case, and the police, and he lives here in the UK, the police from Ireland came over to here to interview him. So it does happen, but I have no way of actually telling that reviewer that she's wrong and I'm right. But hey-ho, I mean, you can't win them all. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting because, like, you know, readers are so passionate, especially about these kind of, you know, psychological thrillers, mysteries, things like that. They pick, you know, when we like books, we pick them apart, and it's always gutsy, I think, to like tell the author like this didn't work or this was right, not right. Because you know that you were working as best as you can, right?
Yep. You're so tempted to say to them, well, write your own book then. You know, if you know so well, write it yourself. Because sometimes, and sometimes you get, I always amuses me and a lot of other psychological thrillers is the reviewers who write, I knew who it was from the first page, when we don't know who it is from the first page. Sometimes I don't know who it is until the last chapter, because you just don't know how the story's going to go. Especially, you know, people like me who are total pantsers. You literally get into the story, you kind of get into the characters, and it's almost like they take over writing the book. And that's the sweet point in writing, for me anyways, when the characters feel so real that you're almost writing what they're saying, which is fun. And it's getting to that is just wonderful. I love getting to that point sometimes.
So do your characters sometimes veer from what you think they're going to do? Yes.
Sometimes, you know, I'm thinking, I didn't want this to go this way. I wanted it to go that way. And you think, oh, no, okay, I'll write it that way if that's what you want. It's the fun of writing. You know, I would find it very boring to write a book if I knew from the very beginning exactly what was going to happen. But for me, it's you know, it's almost living the story. And it sometimes, diversions happen, or people die when they're not supposed to die, or they murder somebody else when they're not supposed to murder somebody else. But yeah, it's part of the fun. You have to enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing most of the time. Sometimes it's hard work. I find editing hard work, but it has to be done.
So you do your own editing? You don't have an editor through your publisher?
No, my publisher has an editor. Yeah, so I give my finished manuscript to my editor first, And she normally sends it back with 3 or 4 pages of suggestions that I change. So that first is a structural edit. It's a big one. It can take anything from 2 to 3 weeks to do a structural edit. And then it goes back to her and she gives it to a copy editor. And she's the person who kind of checks timelines, make sure I use the same person's name all the way through and I don't change someone's name halfway, and that kind of thing, and just checks for continuity. And then it goes back again, but I check all that to make sure it's all right and agree with what she says. And then it goes back again, and then a proofreader goes through it all. So, and they hopefully pick up any errors. And honestly, after that's 4 pairs of eyes who are reading it, and still sometimes you're getting error going through. You know, I do try to do my last personal edit on it before I give it to my editor. My last draft, I try to do an audio edit, so I listen to it as well as read it, and it's amazing how much you pick up when you're hearing it, and especially if you hear repetitive words. Clunky sentences just don't flow properly. So I can spend time on making sure that is done better. So it's very valuable from my point of view. I find it a very valuable edit. So
how do you listen to your book if it's not in audiobook format yet?
I do it in the computer. There's a read option on my Word. It's great. The voice is a bit iffy, but yeah, I find it great. I used to send it to my iPad, which has a read thing, but in fact, my Microsoft now have a read option on the Word program, so I do that. It tends to be a bit fast sometimes. I can't seem to stop it, but yeah, I find it a very valuable tool in the editing process.
I've never heard that before. That's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense because sometimes you've looked at it so often that you don't even.
Exactly, yeah. Or it picks up words you've missed, might be a that missing or an a missing, and especially in repeated words, or just clunky sentences that just don't sound well. And I catch myself, if I ever catch myself saying "it'll do," then I know it won't, because your readers deserve more than "it'll do." So that's when I stop and say, work on the sentence. Sometimes I work so long on a sentence that I end up saying, I can't get it done. I take it out altogether. So rather than having a clunky sentence that again takes you out of the book, it's better to remove. If I can't smooth it out, it's better just to take it out altogether if I can. So
now that you've written and published 34 books or about that.
24.
24, sorry. Do you find that your process is very different now than when you first started?
I hope I'm better. But yeah, I think certainly I only started doing audio edits in the last maybe 2 years. I certainly think that was a huge advantage. And it was another writer who told me about that. I think I'm just a writer now than I was. I think when I started writing first, I was so desperate to impress. I used a lot of big words that I thought people would find impressive. And in fact, it was silly. I took them out because my Irish series, I self-published initially, and then they were actually published by Bloodhound. And when at that stage, I was able to go through and take out silly words that I thought would impress people. And people don't want to be impressed. They want to read a story. So that's something I've learned. I take out a lot of speech tags. So you don't have to say she said, he said every sentence. So I've taken out those as well. So, and sometimes adding more descriptions, sometimes taking them out. So yeah, I hope I'm better now than I was 10 years ago.
I mean, I think we all get better at doing things as we go, right?
Yeah, but it's a learning thing. I mean, I think we always should be learning. And I do read my reviews. I try not to read the bad ones, but you do anyway. And you learn from them. Some constructive criticism is great. Unfortunately, sometimes reviews can be quite destructive. We try to forget those, but you don't. You always remember them anyway. But yeah, I think I'm always learning something.
Helen says or asks, speaking of names, how do you decide on names for your characters?
I am absolutely awful for names. I am so bad when I'm writing, because I don't plan at all. I don't even plan names. And I have been known to use the same name for 3 different characters. Because, you know, actually the name was David. So I was writing the book, and a male character comes into the page, and I said, oh, I call him David. But then a few chapters later, I had another male character come into the page. I said, oh, I call him David. So I ended up with 3 characters called David. So my editor wasn't impressed. So 2 of those Davids were removed. I now try to write names down before I start, just the names. So I have a mix of names, and editors don't like you using the same names with the same initial. So I can't have Barbara and Betty, for instance. So you're trying to think of different names that you haven't used a million times already. I've got no imagination when it comes to names. I'm terrible. And again, with surnames, I tend to go onto the internet and find surnames. But yeah, and again, you can't have the same initial or names that sound similar. It just makes it harder for the reader to differentiate between characters if the names all sound the same. So you can't have a Molly and a Polly either. Not that I would, but I do have a Polly, but one of mine, but not in the same book. So yeah, I have no imagination when it comes. I get imagination when it comes to killing people, just not naming them.
Your strengths lie elsewhere.
My strengths lie elsewhere. Yeah, my poor editor despairs, and I have learned to have different names now. I don't call every male character by the same name anymore.
So fun. Adrian asks, does your husband read or edit your books? No,
he doesn't read a book at all. The only thing he reads is the newspaper. He will look at the covers, and that's about it. That's all he does. He did say to me that when they were in audio, he'd listen to them, but then they were in audio and he didn't listen to them. So, you know, not everybody is a reader. So I have 5 sisters and they all read them. And I have a lot of friends and they all read them. So yeah, you know, he doesn't at all.
My husband's not a reader either, but, you know, occasionally he'll pick up something that I recommend, which is always fun. Do you write with the audiobook performance in mind?
No, I don't. Not at all. Sometimes, no, I don't actually even that. One of my books, where is it? And I show you this one. This book I initially wrote, it was initially self-published, and then it was published by my new publisher, Boulder Books, early this year. And my editor wanted to take one of the scenes out to change the story slightly. And I said no. And the reason I said no was because I envisaged that particular scene in a movie. I didn't write it to be made into a movie, but when I'd written it, I thought I'd love to see that in a movie. So I don't do it in advance, but sometimes I think, oh, that would be a great movie. So no, but I don't do it for audio. I do have the audio. The narrator of my books is a woman called Rose Robinson, and she's got a lovely voice. I did get a choice actually with my current publisher. You're given a choice of 3 or 4 people. So you can listen to them and decide which book you think suits yours better. And I chose that lady. So something come up in my book. There's that. So yeah, so I have the same, I get her, something keeps popping up in my, I have the same. They get her for all of my books now, except the Trophy Wife. The Trophy Wife, strangely, it's the only book I've written from a male point of view. And the reason I did was because people ask where you get the ideas from a book from. I actually got the idea for this book when I was sitting in a cafe in London waiting for Robert to come back from a meeting. And I was sitting in an outside cafe and a man walked past. And by the time I got home, I had the whole of the end of the book in my head written, and it was from his point of view. Then I had to go back and write the start of the book, of course. So yeah, but it's the only book I've written from a male point of view.
Oh wow. So do you write, I know the Librarian was written in 3rd person perspective. So was that written in 3rd person perspective from a male, his perspective?
No, it's actually written first person. Yeah, actually, I love writing in 1st person. I don't always do. It just depends on the book, depends on the character. But I wrote from a 1st person from a male point of view, which is yeah. I think it worked quite well, actually. People, I loved the character that Jake, his name is. I loved his story. In fact, it's actually one of my favorite books that I've written. You tend to have your favorite babies. That's my favorite book, and that and The Three Women I loved as well, which is an earlier book as well. So yeah, and of course I love The Librarian.
So what was it about The Trophy Wife that you liked so much?
The story just came together really well for me, because it follows this young man, Jake, who is leaving school, and he lives just outside Bristol with his parents, just not up the train, with his parents, and his parents are very working class, solid people. His father they have no ambitions, and his father thinks anybody who has ambitions has an ideas above their station. And Jake desperately wants to have ideas above his station, and he applies to go to Oxford University, and he's accepted on a scholarship, and his parents don't want him to go. They want him to take a job in the factory where the father works. So he runs away. He runs away to Oxford, and he becomes successful, but he leaves his parents behind. He never contacts his parents again. He sends them Christmas cards, and that's it. He just cuts himself off from that life. And then he meets a young man called Adam, and they become best friends. But Adam comes from a moneyed background. He comes from a landed gentry type. His parents have a cook, and they have servants, and they have a big house. And Jay desperately wants that, and he thinks he can buy it. So as he succeeds from university and gets a job, a very wealthy job, he earns, and I tell you, it's great fun researching how you can spend money when you're really, 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 really rich. That was part of the fun writing that book. But he discovers that he thinks he can buy what his friend Adam has. You can't buy that kind of life. You either have it or you don't have it. And it's his story about how he tries to get the life that Adam has, and unfortunately he just does it all wrong. And it's there's some of it that's quite sad. And it's got a sad ending, actually, by the way. Sorry, one of my few that has a sad ending, even though I like it most. But it was great fun because he becomes a banker, and he earns gazillions of pounds. And this is before all the banks collapsed. And he marries this woman, and they have a wedding on a ship at sea, and it's just money. And that was great fun. I had to research, how very expensive restaurants and what you'd eat at these very expensive restaurants, and how much they would cost. Kind of £400 and £500 bottles of wine for lunch. This kind of thing. Oh, and I love it. No, but I wouldn't. But it was fun writing it.
It sounds like it would be really interesting for us to read it too, because it really captures like his whole, like what's going on in his brain to like make him want to do that, like from the time he was a kid, very much like your story of like what your childhood has made you into the person you are today.
It's a very strange, the ending is not everybody gets the ending. The ending's slightly different, and I think some people just don't really understand what I'm trying to say at the ending. So I won't give you a spoiler, but it was deliberately written the way it is. And I did add a bit of, again, because I self-published and it was published by Boldwood Books earlier this year, I did change the ending slightly to make it clearer for people what I was trying to get across. Because if people don't understand, it's because I failed in somehow. But it is this is slightly different. I don't write books, they're not the same story each time, each standalone. And I try to make stories just different, because you don't want to hear the same story again and again and again. You don't want to hear about the woman who kills her husband or the husband who kills them. And I don't like stories where the female character is beaten up and is in every book. I don't do gratuitous violence. I don't do graphic violence. It has a place in some books, and some writers like it. There's a certain amount of violence, obviously, because they're psychological thrillers, but I don't do graphic violence. I don't think I need to. There is some sex in that one. Sorry, but again, it was necessary for the story. I think that's the difference between if it's necessary for the story, I'm happy to use sex or violence to a certain extent, and it's not graphic sex either, really. But I think once it's a good part of the story, and it's necessary for the story. It's necessary to show the characters. And in The Trophy Wife, it's to show how Jake and his girlfriend, wife, as she will be, Anne, it really shows their relationship. The sex life they have together is part of showing how very superficial both of them are, really.
Interesting. Somebody asked, as such a prolific writer, what makes the difference between a book that is difficult to write versus one that is not problematic for you?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I think all books are difficult to a certain extent. Sometimes I think, you know, and it's across the board for me. I get to a stage, and this is the good thing with having writing friends, because I have friends that I can write to and say, I don't think this book's no good. And they all say, you always say that, because I always do say that. There's always a part in a book where you think, the characters aren't behaving, they're not taking over, they're just lying back and ignoring me. And so there's always a part of that. And I think what makes a successful writer for me is perseverance. It's getting through that bit where you're afraid you're going to write rubbish and just motoring through that. And as I write more, that's kind of becoming even more difficult, because what I don't want to do now, I don't want to disappoint my readers. I don't want them to say, she's lost it, you know, she should stop now. So I try to make each book I write better than the last one, which is not easy, believe me. So yeah, there is always a part when I think it's not going to work. So far, I haven't ever given up on a book. I've always worked through that hiccup to get the book finished, and the books have always done well for me, which is good. So I hopefully it'll keep going, fingers crossed, keep going that way. But I know people have often asked me, what's the secret of being a successful writer? And I would consider myself relatively successful. I make a good living from writing. So perseverance is the key, I think, to being a successful writer. Just keep writing, because you can't write one book unless you're J.K. Rowling. It rarely happens that a person writes one book and becomes a huge success. It happens, but that's rare. You mostly get people like me who plod along, write 3 or 4 books a year, and make a relatively good living. And I do. So, and I love what I do, which is a great plus to it as well.
I'm curious about that question that came in after you said that you saw that guy crossing the street, and then you had an entire end of your book in your head at that moment. So is that like an easier book for you to write than something else?
Yeah, it is sometimes. When that was the whole end of the book, so I had to then backtrack and see where he came from. But it did make it a bit easier. And one of my other books that came like that way, I can't find it now. Oh, this one, Secrets Between Us. This was my insomnia book. I woke up, I was awake most of the night, and by the time I woke up in the morning, I had the whole story for that.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't often happen. That was, it did not completely, but I knew where it was going to go. I knew how it was going to go. That it does make it easy. Sometimes I sit to write a book and I've only got tiniest, vaguest idea. And that's hard, because you don't know where to go next. But I spend a lot of my time thinking about my characters, and I don't plan in advance, but I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about them, and sometimes to the detriment of my sleeping, unfortunately. But yeah, and as I said, at the moment, I'm not too sure where my characters are going to go at the moment. So I know at 2 a.m, I'll be awake thinking, oh yeah, I'll have her doing this, and then I'll have her doing that, and then he'll do this and he'll do that, and it'll come together. I hope.
So I'm going to ask this question, although it sounds like it's a no. Do you have a writing routine?
Routine. Yeah, I write every day. I try to start first thing in the morning. I used to go to the gym first thing in the morning, but my gym's shut. So now I start writing first thing in the morning. I try to do I'm up early, so I tend to write from 8 o'clock, stop for coffee several times during the morning. I drink way too much coffee. Stop for lunch, maybe. If Robert's here, I'll stop for lunch. If he's not here, I'll take lunch back to my laptop. My office is upstairs. and I'll have lunch while catching up on social networking. And then I'll write in the afternoon till, depends, 4 or 5 o'clock, sometimes 6 o'clock. Depends on how the story is. Sometimes it's just flowing and you just want to keep at it. And sometimes you have a deadline and you have to keep at it. So it's that as well. But it's very easy to be distracted, and I'm easily distracted. Coffee distracts me, social networking distracts, but I have to do a certain amount of social networking. So I consider that part of the job. But I am easily distracted.
Oh, aren't we all nowadays?
Yeah.
So you had said that The Nurse is coming out next. Oh, wait, before I get to what's next for you, tell us what you are reading.
I've just finished an advanced reader copy of a writer friend of mine, Diana Wilkinson, who has a book coming out in next month sometime. So she asked me to read it for her so I could give her an author quote for the end of it. So I've just finished reading that. It's good. Yeah. I used to read a book every 2 or 3 days. Now I'm lucky if I read a book a month. The problem is and you might find this sometimes too, you're dealing with words all day. The last thing I want sometimes at the end of a day is to see more words. So I would prefer to watch TV, crime series usually. So I don't read as much as I used to do. I just don't have, I don't have the time. And a lot of the time I'm reading, like Diana's book, I'm reading advanced reader copies from other authors who want a quote or who want feedback. I have a very good writing friend, Jenny O'Brien. She writes crime series and we read each other's books. So she'll read mine when I finish. And of course, you're always there kind of waiting for that first feedback to come back. And we're very honest with each other because there's no point in not being. So, and it's when she gets back to me and says, it's okay, it's good, there's a huge sigh of relief. Yeah, it's very important to have someone like that as a writer, someone who's honest with you, because what you don't want to say, oh yeah, oh, it's great, no problem, when it's actually not. So, so yeah, it's good.
Definitely. Now, I'll go back to the last question that I would like to ask is like, you said that The Nurse is coming out, it's done. Do you know when it's coming out?
21st of July.
Oh, okay. So you said, you did say you write 3 or 4 books a year. So you probably have something sort of every quarter. And then what are you working on?
I am working on another book, and I have, at the moment, it's the working title is, I have no idea what this book is going to be called, book. And it's about a woman who has had a rough time with her partner, and her partner had actually died. And she's decided to follow a dream, and she's bought this very old house in the countryside, and she's having it renovated to run a B&B. Unfortunately, as always happens in psychological thrillers, things don't go quite to plan. So things are starting to fall apart. I just haven't decided yet who's the bad person in it. I have a vague idea who it's going to be, but I have to, of course, because psychological thrillers, you have to put a twist in. So I'm trying to get the readers to believe it's going to be this person, but in fact, it's going to be another person, I think. So
I think your process is fascinating. I would love to talk to you for like a whole nother hour, but I know people probably have to go. But Gail says thank you for this lovely afternoon tea. Valerie,
pleasure. You're lovely here.
And fun, and I really appreciate you being willing to spend your time with us. I know it's dinner time for you, so I really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure.
We will look forward to your books, and remember, you can buy signed books from Valerie from Aesop's Fable. I put the link in the chat, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and have some more tea and relaxing time and read Valerie's books because they're amazing. So
thank you all very much for coming and listening to me. Thanks, Mina, for inviting me, and to Ashton Public Library for allowing it. Very kind.
This has been fabulous. So have a wonderful day. I hope you and Robert have a nice dinner.
Thank you. Whatever's in the fridge.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.